Okay, so we're back here on YouTube this week. We're picking up with the first of three previews that we're going to be doing for stakes races across the country this week. I already had a preview of the San Diego, if you remember back before the race was postponed to this upcoming weekend, but I wanted to kind of update that video. Not that I was upset with any of the takes that I have. I still have the same opinion about all the horses in here, but I wanted to bring my co-host on it just kind of talk a little bit more about this because we have very similar opinions, but ultimately different conclusions, which we'll get to later on in the show. But as usual, we go through the fields at the beginning of this, so it's the same as last time except for one scratch or one not scratch, but one horse is not re-entered. So the six that do come back are Higher Power, Axeman, Sharp Samurai, Combatant, Maximum Security, and Midcourt. We'll start with talking about Higher Power. Obviously, he does have the win at Del Mar, and the Pacific Classic win from last year is going to be very attractive to a lot of people. And, if you go back to history, which I'm sure has been discussed ad nauseum, I talked about it a little bit. If you go back 3 years ago, Arrogate coming back from the Middle East, very similar set of circumstances. He hadn't raced since his race to Dubai World Cup at Maximum Security. Big favorite in this race, hasn't raced since the Saudi Cup. Sadler pulled an upset with a horse, Accelerate. I think Accelerate is overall a better, more talented horse than Higher Power is, but ultimately that's irrelevant. But I'm concerned about Higher Power considering his one race outside of California in the last year or so. The Pegasus World Cup, very underwhelming. 10th place finish, didn't really show that he had anything. So I'm not super high on him, but I know that there are points that can be made for him. But that's what I think. I'm sure you said this on the podcast last week, Eric. But you believe in him a little bit more than I do.
Yeah, I do, and it's not so much that I think he is so much better than this group. I just think, and obviously we'll get to the questions about Maximum Security in a little bit, so I won't go too in depth on him. But I just think he's the horse that's been the most consistent, that not always getting the job done, but since going to the John Sadler barn, he's only missed the board twice, once in the Pegasus and once in the Gold Cup in 2019. So he's run good races otherwise. I do love that he has that win at Del Mar in the Pacific Classic, and the Gold Cup second last time out was pretty good. I don't think any of that group was going to beat Improbable that day. But still a good run from him nonetheless. And I just think that there's enough positives coming from him that I'm willing to go with him. Plus, I do like that Flavian Pratt's going to be aboard, unlike last week where he wouldn't have had the chance to ride him.
The two horses, Axeman, one of two Bob Baffert trainees running in this race. And it's very interesting. I actually, when I looked at him the first time, I think that he could get a very favorable setup in this race and not necessarily run a winning effort or a placing, but I think he can run well underneath a third or a fourth. But, aside from that, there's not really much to look at him otherwise. Is just a horse that maybe if he gets a favorable setup and they don't go too fast, he could stick around a little bit. But aside from that, I don't really think that he's a contender for a win in a race like this.
Yeah, in his stakes efforts, he's really just been subpar. The big thing that I think, if you're going to give him some credit, he is 2 for 3 going a mile and a 16th, and his only loss was a third in a graded stakes behind some decent horses a couple years ago. He is 2 for 3 this year as well. He just hasn't been beating the best of horses, and he's been losing to better horses. On paper, not a lot to go with him, but I do like what Jack said. He could very well get a somewhat easy, early lead and at least hold on to grab a placing.
3 is Sharp Samurai, and this is a horse that there's a lot of questions. If you don't look really far down in his races, you would ask why he's running in a race like this. But this horse, contrary to what you would think if you look at his most recent races, he has run on dirt before. He broke his maiden on dirt all the way back in 2016. He has not raced on the dirt since the 9th of March 2017. And, that's the big question mark, and probably the reason why he's in this race is just the question of is he of the level that he can run well in a race like this? Even if he does have something on dirt that wasn't shown in his 3 starts on dirt back when he was a 2 and 3-year-old, I don't really think that there's anything here that would lead you to believe that this is a horse that could win a race like this against company like this. Even though this isn't the best company, this would not be the spot for a horse to win a race, for him to win a race on dirt.
Yeah, and I'll give him credit where credit's due. In his dirt win, he did win by 9 lengths, and in his last dirt race, he lost to the likes of Battle of Midway and a couple other graded stakes horses were also in that race back in 2017. So I don't think the bad effort in that race was so much because he didn't like the dirt. I think he likes the dirt just fine. But as Jack said, he's been a grass horse through and through for the last couple of years. And he's been pretty good at that level, losing to good horses pretty much every time. But now the step up is needed. There's just a lot of questions around this horse. There's some other runners in this race that are probably a little bit more secure to pick.
The number 4 horse is Combatant, the second of the 2 John Sadler trained horses. And Combatant is a perfect example of a horse that wasn't really performing up to a top tier level for another trainer. And John Sadler comes in, gets him, and has since turned him into a Grade 1 winner. And he's run well in several stakes on the West Coast. He was third in the San Pasquale prior to his win in the Santa Anita Handicap. He came back and ran a disappointing 10th in the Oaklawn Handicap, but as Eric said on the show last week, and I'll give him the opportunity to say in a moment, some horses that did run poorly in that race have come back to run well. So he's not a complete write-off off of that 10th in the Oaklawn Handicap, but it's the question of, honestly, if you're a person who's trying to beat maximum security, which I'm sure 70% of the people out there might want to be doing, then you're going to want to look to one of the 2 Sadler horses. So it's obviously him or higher power if you're looking at the Sadler horses.
Yeah, and in that Oaklawn Handicap, he had trouble every now and then. He started to pick it up into the stretch, and then he just kind of flattened out. But I'm willing to draw a line through it. He ran into a lot of trouble. That being said, his only real good win was that Santa Anita Handicap, or his big one, I should say, and that was against a really bad group. If Multiplier is running second in a Grade 1, that shows you how good that race is. So that I have to knock him on the fact he hasn't beat much, but there isn't much better in this race like that Santa Anita Handicap. It's around the same level, in my opinion. I don't know if he's necessarily a win candidate, but a great underneath look if you're looking for one. And there's the big. One of my bigger knocks on him is he is only 1 for 7, going a mile and a 16th. It seems like this is a horse who likes to go longer and longer. He just likes more distance.
We're actually going to skip over maximum security for the moment and get to the final horse in the race, and the last of the 3 who we give a real legitimate chance to beat maximum security. And the 6 horse Midcourt is the horse that of the 3 is definitely the weakest of the 3. The 2 Sadler horses have good Grade 1 wins, and that does not exist when you look at Midcourt. Midcourt did, if you go back to last year on the Southern California circuit, did have a couple of stakes wins, including a Grade 3, the Native Diver, before he lost to San Antonio to Gift Box. And then he won the San Pasquale over Combatant. We talked about that the last segment with Combatant, but going into his next 2 races, the Santa Anita Handicap was a very discouraging 3rd place for him. And then the Hollywood Gold Cup was, I would say, a step back for Midcourt. So, we've said this in the past about him. He's the type of horse that can win these graded stakes races when all the leading horses on the West Coast go out east or go out to the Middle East, and he's just kind of left to pick up the pieces. But when he's running against some of the top-level horses, he's not one that gets the job done in terms of the win. So I don't really like Midcourt at all in this race. I would say that the 2 Sadler horses are the better options.
Yeah, and he came into this year looking like he was ready to take the lead, and he would have been, down the road a favorite for this race. But last 2 races especially, things have really just not gone his way. I do think that Gold Cup was a step back. Santa Anita Handicap, good run, only beaten 3/4 of a length in 3rd, but if you can't beat that group easily, then I really do question how good you are. Would I be surprised if you won this race? No, because that's just kind of how this division is every year. And to his credit, he is 2 for 2 at Del Mar with a Grade 3 win. However, that was not a very tough group in that Grade 3 win. So I don't think there's a lot of question. We know what this horse is. We know what he's made of. I do like that he is cutting back in distance. That is one thing I will give him credit for. His worst losses, at least his last two, have been at a mile and a quarter. He's always been better at a mile 16th, mile and an eighth. So those are two things that I think bode well for him. However, I don't personally like him to win.
And we're going to go back and talk about the number 5 horse, Maximum Security. Obviously, all the attention is going to be on him in this race. First start, I should say, for new trainer Bob Baffert. And Maximum Security is followed to the Bob Baffert barn by all the baggage that has come out in light of the indictments against his former trainer Jason Service. And, obviously the allegations are, which they most likely are going to be proven true. It's an unfortunate situation that the horse was involved in something like that. But in terms of talking about him with regards to winning a race like this, you really have to question, looking back at him, if he is really the same horse. And I'm of the belief that I don't really trust him coming into this race because, number one, there's the question marks about the fact that is he the same horse, and then there's also the fact that he is coming into this race off of an extremely long layoff. And I mentioned Arrogate at the top of the show. You look at Arrogate, and Arrogate didn't have the drug baggage following him, and Arrogate ran a very subpar race in the San Diego Handicap. So, if you don't want to look at the drug issue, you just have to look at the fact that he is coming into this race off of basically a 5-month layoff. So, that's the number one thing that's super unattractive. I ultimately did bite the bullet and go with him just because I don't respect any of the other horses in this race, but I can 100% understand and respect any person's decision with going against him, because I really think that it's not, I think it's split down the middle 50-50 as to whether or not you go with him.
It's a tough situation because, and for me, I'm just going to start by saying I'm not picking him. I don't think he's going to run well. He's looked great in his works for Baffert, but at the same time, a lot of bad Baffert horses work great in the mornings. It's just how the program works. I'm talking about, 750,000, yearling purchases who work lights out and then, lose by 20 combined lengths in their first 2 starts. They work the same as a horse that wins, their first 10 races for Baffert. It's all the same. They all look the same when they work. So I'm willing to look past that. I'm willing to look past all the wins. Early on in his career, he was winning by so much that I don't think medication would have mattered. I don't think that would have I think he was still just that talented. But in every race since that Florida Derby, really, it's been obvious to me that this was a tired horse. This was a horse who was not really, that looked like he was struggling off the turn every single race, and he just somehow grinded it out. And now we know what the somehow was. And even looking back on some of Service's best horses this year, we have not seen many wins. Even last week, Mugzamatic, who ran in the United Nations, he won his first start back for Mike Maker from the barn switch, but then he did not run well in the United Nations. A couple other horses who have stepped up to stakes companies have been beaten by a lot in that level. And I have so many things. I'm very willing to get beat by this horse in this race on Saturday because I truly don't trust him. There's just so many things telling me that he's not going to be the same horse that we've seen. And if anything, if I'm going to just add on top of it, the layoff is one of the biggest concerns. I mean, there's not much to like about a horse coming off a layoff. And one last point I have to make, and this is the logic I've kind of been using. It's not the soundest logic, but for me, it just makes sense, puts it all into perspective. Firenze Fire won the True North a couple weeks ago at Belmont for a new trainer, Kelly Breen, by about a length and a half. But it was a much different version of Firenze Fire. We're talking about a horse who last year in the Service Farm would have won that race by 8 or 9 going away. That's how he'd been winning for Service. Now we saw him grinding out a race, having to work really hard, winning by just a length or two. And obviously not as talented as he once was with the enhancements, but he still was good enough. And that was about a 6-7 length difference. For Maximum Security, he's won his last, the 5 of his last 6 races by about a length or two every time. So if I use that same, okay, this horse is going to regress 6 lengths from what he used to be with the enhancements of Service, then this horse is going to lose by 7 or 8 lengths now. That's just the logic I'm using here, and that's kind of the logic I've used with all the other service horses that have lost, and it's been pretty solid day in and day out. There's a 6-length regression in their first start back from the service barn, and if that's 6 lengths in this group, he's done. He's going to finish dead last.
All right, so that is just some of our thoughts on this race this weekend. Obviously, very tough call. This is not what I would call a better friendly race. I would not bet this race if I was looking at it just from a handicapping perspective. But if you do choose to bet it, those are the ways that we look at this race. Again, if you do decide to play it, good luck, and thanks for stopping by. We got some good stuff coming from Saratoga this week, and Acacia Courtney will be joining me to talk about the Alfred Vanderbilt handicap at Saratoga. So looking forward to have that. We'll have previews for a couple of the other stakes there. So we will see you for those later, and we'll see you on the podcast later this week.